So I just watched Medea's Destination Wedding, written and directed by Tyler Perry. And if you couldn't tell, I'm not really a Medea fan. So if you're wondering how I came to watch this, it's because I'm part of a club that meets in my area called the Bad Movie Club, where we get together and we just watch bad movies. And since Halloween is coming up, we were looking for some bad Halloween movies to watch, and we ultimately settled on Boo, a Medea Halloween. And the leader of the club has actually seen every Medea movie. So when we were all saying how bad that Boo a Medea Halloween was, because it was very bad, did not enjoy it, he said that was actually not the worst Medea movie. And he said the worst one was Medea's Destination Wedding. And we were all like, oh, well, we got to watch that at some point. And he said, no, I'm never going to subject you all to that. We're not watching it. So I ultimately just decided I'm going to bite the bullet, watch it myself, because I'm just really curious as to how bad it could possibly be. And now that I've watched it, I have to say it is bad, but Boo and Medea Halloween was worse. It was definitely worse. If I could try to explain briefly why this one was better, scenes in this are not as excruciatingly long as they are in Boo a Medea Halloween. Like every scene in that movie just felt super dragged on and like it was never going to end. And there were one or two scenes like that here, but for the most part, it was more paced, like kind of a typical movie that's like a comedy without much of a plot. Like, yeah, there's not much of a plot, but at least the scenes aren't dragging on. Some things in this, either there was actually decent writing or delivery, or there were some things that just caught me off guard so much that they actually made me laugh, versus Boo and Medea Halloween, where I think I chuckled once. That's it. Here I was actually kind of laughing like maybe once every 10 minutes or so. And there is actually a somewhat interesting mystery in this involving why Brian's ex wife is trying to rush his daughter Tiffany's wedding. So there were like a few things this one had over Boo and Medea Halloween. But don't get me wrong, this one was still bad. And this is the kind of movie where it's like, I can't really express why it's bad in many words. So I literally just sort of wrote down thoughts I was having as I was watching. And hopefully this will better explain my experience. So let's see what I wrote down. Film starts, and literally first seconds of the movie, Medea was walking out of a grocery store. Like in Boo and Medea Halloween, it took a little bit for Medea to show up, but she's just already there here, so pain's starting early. Uh, in that same scene, Medea like tosses a shopping cart aside, and then we hear that shopping cart hit a car like 2 seconds later, even though when she threw the shopping cart, they were nowhere near another car, so I don't know what car they hit that it hit the car so soon. Then they go to a gas station, Medea and some of her friends, and Medea gets carjacked at the gas station, and the thieves literally point a gun at her, and instead of just shooting her, they proceed to let Medea hit them with her purse and then douse them in gasoline and light them on fire. Like that was definitely one of the things that just caught me so off guard. I had no other response but just to kind of laugh at it. Next scene, there was annoying arguing between Brian and his ex-wife. The ex-wife makes fun of their son because he's like such a wimp and stuff. And I'm like, okay, well that's great parenting right there. We then meet his daughter Tiffany's new boyfriend, and like this is the first time he's meeting the dad Brian, and he just starts immediately saying how he's gonna hit that when they get home, and like who does that when they first meet their girlfriend's dad? Brian goes to see his dad Joe and Medea, and Medea jumps out of the bushes during the scene dressed as the bog monster of Louisiana. Was like, what's going on here? Where'd you get that? Joe starts saying things like stitches get snitches, and he calls Brian a Democrat. I think I was just writing down some of the least funny jokes from that scene. Brian at one point asks, why did I come over to your house? And I have the same question because he should know they are not going to actually help him. They have the exact same conversations about Brian's lenient parenting versus Joe and Medea's more strict parenting that they did in Boo and Medea Halloween. At least this is the only scene where they talk about that, versus that's like half the conversations in Boo and Medea Halloween. And we get the same jokes about how Joe used to beat Brian when he was younger, and Brian didn't like that. And I just, my main thought during this scene was, how do scenes where it's just Tyler Perry talking to two other versions of himself go on for so long? Like, he's not riffing off of people who are actually there. He's riffing off of himself, who is going to be filmed later. So I don't understand how it could possibly drag on this long. Brian then later on proceeds to abuse his power as district attorney to spy on his son-in-law. Like, they're like, literally all that's happened is the son-in-law has been a bit disrespectful to him, so he's already like, we need to see if this kid has a criminal record. Like, you're not allowed to do that. We then get a scene where Brian is just the punching bag of the family. Again, very similar to Boo and Madea Halloween. In that scene, there's a joke where it's funny because Joe told the new son-in-law he shouldn't say the N-word, and then he says the word himself, and that's funny because he said don't say it, and then he said it. There's a point where Joe says, "What is a defecation wedding?" And it's funny because instead of destination, you hear defecation, and that's the joke. Aunt Bam makes a joke about weed, but he does not. She does not bring up her prescription card that she brought up 10 times in Bua Medea Halloween. And I was kind of wondering where Hattie was because they just don't explain why she's not in this one. And don't get me wrong, I'm happy about that because she was really annoying. But it's like they don't explain why she's not in this movie for some reason. I mean, maybe that's why I like this one better. Hattie's not in it. She was really annoying. Tiffany and her mom try to guilt Brian into paying for the wedding, and they're really laying it on thick about how we can't afford anything because he's poor. And just it made me remember that in Bua Medea Halloween they said that Brian's ex-wife cheated on him and left him for someone else. And Medea and Joe actually try to help him and tell him not to let what she's saying get to him, but he pays for the wedding anyway. It was around this point that I realized that Cora, who I believe is supposed to be Medea's daughter with Mr. Brown, is probably the only likable character in this movie because at least she like tries to help out frequently. There is an extended joke later on about how Medea has a million warrants and is wanted in a ton of countries, so she can't get a passport. She thinks she's going to get arrested at one point, so she jumps through a glass door, and that was at least somewhat like more of a stunt than anything that happened in Bua Medea Halloween. They're at the airport, and Medea and Aunt Bam are riding on one of those airport transportation carts, and the tires go flat when they get off of it. I guess it's supposed to be funny because they're big and yeah, okay. Um, on the plane, Brian's son BJ is listening to Beethoven, and when he tells Joe that, Joe thinks he's talking about the dog. That's supposed to be funny, I guess. Oh, here we go. There's kind of a funny moment when Joe lets BJ listen to the music he's listening to, which is like very explicit rap, and BJ's kind of like freaking out because he's like, "Well, what are you listening to? What is this?" That was a little funny, I guess. Once they get to the hotel, Joe goes to the casino and immediately charges $5,000 to Brian's credit card, which, first of all, dick move. And second of all, this hotel is like terrible fraud protection if they're just letting people charge things to one guy's card. Sure, that's how that works. There's a scene where people start laughing at something Medea says, and I'm like, well, it's the best acting in the movie. Actually acting like they think Medea's funny. uh, when Brian's ex-wife is being all nice to Medea, she actually starts to get a little suspicious and starts looking out for Tiffany's best interests, which is kind of surprising because in Bua Medea Halloween, like the only person she was looking out for was herself, pretty much. There's a joke where Aunt Bam says that a swimsuit she's wearing was inspired by Kim Kardashian, and throughout this scene, Aunt Bam keeps trying to hit on Tiffany's fiance. That's cool, I guess. I did kind of laugh at a diss that Tiffany threw at Medea at one point in this scene. It wasn't great, but it was like a little funny, I guess, and the delivery was good. Medea literally throws her boobs over her shoulder at one point. We then get a scene where Mr. Brown goes down a waterfall or a water slide and he almost drowns. And I guess it's supposed to be funny because they filmed it with a GoPro, so we get GoPro footage, and I guess that's why that's supposed to be funny. They try to get Madea to go down the water slide, and like the quip she gives in return was kind of funny, I guess. Sure. We later get a scene where Joe lies about the bachelor party to get Mr. Brown and BJ to go, and like I kind of get why he wants BJ to go to the bachelor party because he thinks he needs to grow up and be a man, but I do not know why he wants Mr. Brown to go so much. And then when the bachelor party actually happens, BJ isn't even there, so I don't know what the point of that was. One point we see Tiffany trying on her wedding dress, and it's just in the middle of a hotel boutique, not like in her room or where she bought the dress. So I'm just kind of like, well, why are you wearing the dress here? It's a very random place for you to do that. Madea actually brings up a good point about how Tiffany should be allowed to speak for herself and her mother shouldn't speak for her, which is kind of like, okay, Madea keeps saying these awful things and then she just randomly says something that's actually good advice. That's confusing. Which from my understanding, is something that happens a lot in these other movies, but it didn't happen in Boo and Madea Halloween. She was just awful throughout that one. Madea says to Brian that he needs to let Tiffany make her own decisions, and that if she makes the wrong ones and she comes crying to him, then he needs to reassure her that she has a home to come back to, even though A, the movie started with Madea saying Brian needs to beat his kids for being disrespectful, and B, Boo and Madea Halloween ended with Madea wanting Brian to kick Tiffany out of his house because she was being disrespectful, so very much goes against what Madea usually thinks about raising kids, but okay. Maybe that's supposed to fix that somehow. There's a scene where the fiance is at the bachelor party and he's telling the DJ to turn the music up, and it features like three quick zooms. Like it starts here, and then he says another word, and it goes here, and then he says another word, and the camera's all up in his face like this. So that was kind of weird. Great directing, Tyler Perry. Uh, Brian later on sees the fiance at one point just arguing with a random woman, and he immediately jumps to he must be cheating. Don't see how that's particularly incriminating if I'm being honest. Like maybe it's something else. Maybe he knows this woman from another place. And then he like gets everyone around him to like go to the fiance, and they're like he's like, "Oh, he's cheating. Look, I knew it." And then later on it turns out that the woman he was arguing with was actually his mom. Twist, I guess. But neither of them say anything to clear this up while everyone's around. So they both just let everyone think the fiance's cheating. So really, it's more the fiance's fault for being an idiot, even though they try and blame Brian for not trusting him. Joe makes multiple passes at different women in this scene, including Tiffany's mom and the fiance's mom, and he's just wearing a red suit because he loves to joke about how he used to be a pimp. And the women just have no reaction to anything Joe says. So I don't like. I guess they're just deaf at that point in the scene. There's a dramatic scene between Tiffany and her mother that's consistently interrupted with live Madea reactions of her just going "ooh," or just repeating words that Tiffany said, undercuts the drama a bit. And then there's an out of nowhere scene where the fiance talks to Brian about how he watched his brother get killed right in front of him when he used to deal drugs. This wildly conflicts with the tone of the overall movie. Like I guess you can have semi-dramatic scenes in a movie like this, but this comedic movie should not have discussions of watching your brother die right in front of you. And then at the end of the movie, the wedding happens, and then there's a montage showing how much money everyone charged to Brian's credit card. And throughout this montage, you could hear Mr. Brown continuously just say, "Put it on the card, put it on the card, put it on the card." And this was just going on in the background, and it was kind of driving me insane because he just kept saying it in the background. And then the movie literally ends with Medea's face on $100 bill for no reason. And that was the movie. Those were my most prevalent thoughts throughout. Obviously, it is not a good movie, and I can only really recommend it to die-hard Madea fans, but considering I just watched Boo and Madea Halloween, I can't say it's the worst Madea movie I've ever seen. And I'm going to give Medea's Destination Wedding an F. So one thing I will say is that I read afterwards that I guess instead of Tyler Perry shaving his beard and putting on makeup whenever he played Madea and Joe. I guess he instead just used digital effects to replace his face for the appropriate character. I mean, I will say, I guess to his credit, I didn't notice his face as Madea and Joe looked the same as it did in Boo and Madea Halloween. So good job to the visual effects artists, I suppose. So those are my thoughts on Medea's Destination Wedding. If you've seen this, be sure to let me know what you think down in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe to see more reviews like this very soon. And on that note, I will see you next time. Have a great day.